My dear friends, I'm really sorry not to be with you for this very important meeting, but it conflicts with some of the important work that we have going on this very important year. But I wanted to start, first of all, with what just happened at Gavi. A few weeks ago, we learned that we won the Lasker Bloomberg Public Service Award. This was for providing sustained access to childhood vaccines and around the globe, saving millions of lives and highlighting the power of immunization. Now, this was an extraordinary accomplishment. Some say it's the Nobel Prize, the American Nobel Prize. But this is something that could not be done without the work that all of you do. And I will get to that in a minute. But let me start on kind of where we've been and where we're going, because I think that's important. So what's been the impact of Gavi? So first of all, when Gavi started in 2000, coverage was fairly low, and some of the new and powerful vaccines that existed weren't getting out to the people who needed them the most. At that time, there were about 6 vaccines in the portfolio, and today we will have, as part of the new period in the vaccine investment strategy, 18 different diseases that are going to be met with Gavi's vaccines. So this is an important expansion. What have we been able to do during this period? We've immunized more than 760 million additional children. We've prevented more than 13 million deaths. We've been able to provide about $150 billion in benefits. This is a really extraordinary accomplishment. 430 new vaccine launches in this period. Now, these are things that we're actually pretty good at, and the original goal of Gavi was to try to make sure that countries had access to the new and powerful vaccines that rich countries did. So that intra-country equity was really important. In this next period, we will continue to be able to provide new vaccines for countries. And really, this is only possible because of the expansion of manufacturing capability and volumes that you have provided. So we've gone from having 5 vaccine manufacturers at the beginning of Gavi to now having 17 manufacturers. And as you've expanded your numbers and engaged on the many different vaccines we've had, that has had a dramatic effect on availability, on price, and most importantly for us, on supply security. Because obviously what we don't want is to introduce a vaccine and not have an opportunity to continue that vaccine if there are supply disruptions. So this is really an extraordinary accomplishment that we've all made together. I've talked about equity between countries. Where are we now? So the big challenge we have is when Gavi started, the numbers of coverage was around 59%. That has risen now to around 80% in Gavi countries, a 21% increase in coverage. And this is in spite the continuing numbers of children growing every year due to fertility rates and population growth. So this isn't a major accomplishment on itself. But of course, if we think about this on the broader sense, where we were in the past is having maybe 3 out of 5 children that were vaccinated. Now we're at 4 out of 5, but we really want to do is get to being 5 out of 5. That really changes the world. So how do we need to think about that? Well, this is a completely different role, and that's where we're trying to move to as an alliance. So how do we look for where there are pockets of under-immunized children and really work with countries to intently focus on them? This is, in the old days, used to be in the hinterlands of countries, but today, more and more, they're in urban slums, they're in displaced peoples, they're in stigmatized groups, and this requires a different way of working. So what we're going to do in this next period is really try to enhance our tools and our ways of working to really deal with the unreached. Now, why is that important? The powerful vaccines that you manufacturers make obviously don't do good if they don't get out. But more important, given that vaccines are the most widely distributed of any intervention, if you're not getting a vaccine, you're unlikely getting anything. which means the consequences of not having that vaccines are going to be much more severe. So if you do get sick, you're more likely to die. If an infection occurs, a new infection occurs that can spread in these communities without having health workers there, it's more likely to simmer for a while before it spreads. So this is a risk for global health security as well. So if we can extend the immunization system into these communities, it will have a dramatic effect on equity and global health. But of course, it's not just for immunization, because these communities, because they're left out, don't have a health worker, don't have a supply chain, don't have a data system. And these are the things, if we can build in, will make an enormous difference. So that's some of the plans where we're going in the future. But coming back to the importance of what the manufacturers have been able to do is the sheer volume that we've seen of products that are being produced now. We started off, of course, as a relatively small buyer, and today the DCVMs are providing now more than 50% of the volume of vaccines that are being used across the world. One of the challenges that we've also learned, though, is that Gavi countries are doing quite well, but the challenge is that countries that are slightly above Gavi's cutoff for income are not doing well. And in fact, the estimate is that by 2030, some 70% of children who are under-immunized will actually live in middle-income countries. So one of the things the board has given us permission to do is begin to investigate where there might be a way to work together to try to solve that. Now, obviously, this has to be a sweet spot. This has to be opening up new markets for you manufacturers and doing it in a way that is financially affordable to you. It also has to be a sweet spot for countries who say, gee, there's an advantage to working with Gavi, with other manufacturers to try to bring new products in, and that they can afford to do that. If we are able to succeed on this, what our hope is we come closer to a view that exists in the Sustainable Development Goals, which is leave no one behind. It's access for all, but all meaning not just in Gavi countries, but all across all income levels. Obviously, wealthy countries have their own issues. You've all seen that with vaccine hesitancy, but they have the resources that are able to do it. Our job as a community is to make sure those with limited resources really have access to all the products that are really available. The other thing I'd like to say is that with the increased engagement by the DCVMs, we've also seen very dramatic price reductions over time. This has been a more than 50% price reduction for the big three vaccines we talk about, Penta, Pneumo, and Rota. This is a really important criteria because countries at the end of the day need to afford these vaccines, particularly as now countries are taking 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, maybe up to eventually 18 different vaccines. So this index is really very important, and you've played a very important role in getting countries there. We've also seen, though, with affordability, countries stepping up. Originally, Gavi countries only put a little bit of money into vaccination, but today, in this period, this 5-year period, we see countries investing $1.6 billion in their immunization. And remember, these are the poorest countries in the world. In the next period, our estimate is that's going to jump to $3.6 billion. If you add in the cost that they're putting into their health systems, which is another $6.3 billion, that means close to $10 billion are being invested in vaccines, which is an extraordinary accomplishment. Some of this is through co-financing, but some of this is also through countries have transitioned out of Gavi. We've had so far 15 countries transition out of Gavi. Most of those are keeping their vaccine coverage high. We expect up to 3 more countries by the end of this 5-year period. And then as we move into the next period, we expect another 10 countries to transition. So that would be as many as 28 countries transitioning and fully self-financing their vaccines, which I think is really an extraordinary accomplishment as we think about where we started and where we need to go if this is going to be a sustainable effort. So from my perspective, this has really been an extraordinary story that you have been part of, that you have enabled. It's not only important that you've been able to produce increased volumes, but you've also produced it at a quality that is the same as it is anywhere in the world. And of course, this is important because today, bad news about vaccines spreads at the speed of light, and having that high quality production is absolutely critical if we're to retain confidence in the area of vaccines, and this is going to be critical for the work we're doing in the future. Of course, we hope to see new and exciting vaccines in the future. We have a vaccine for malaria right now that is in implementation trials. I know there's some interest in trying to tech transfer if that makes it to a developing country manufacturer. There's also a tuberculosis vaccine that has shown promise in a phase 2 trials. And we have a number of HIV vaccines in phase 3 trials that hopefully someday will see the light of day, or if not those vaccines, then others that will come down in the future. So this is really going to be an exciting time in vaccines. We're thankful that all of you are there, that you're using your knowledge and technology to produce these high-quality vaccines, and that you're willing to work with us on the challenges in the future, whether it be providing new vaccines, whether it be scaling up existing vaccines, whether it be creating new formulations, a new way to deliver these vaccines. We've seen innovation from a number of your members in that. And again, lastly, let me remind you where we're trying to go. When Gavi began, about 3 out of 5 children were vaccinated. Today, 4 out of 5 children are vaccinated. But if we really want to finish our goal, it should mean that 5 out of 5 children are vaccinated with these amazingly powerful, life-saving tools that can make such a difference across the world. So again, thank you so much for all that you're doing for the children of the world. And again, I apologize for not being with you. And I hope that your deliberations go well. I know a number of my members of my team will be there with you, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions from any of the things that I've brought up.